My guest this week is Septian Hario Seto, a member of Indonesia's National Economic Council, serving under the current President Prabowo Subianto. Previously as Deputy for Investment and Mining Coordination at the Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs, Seto played a pivotal role in designing and implementing Indonesia's so-called nickel downstreaming policy under former President Joko Widodo, which has contributed to Indonesia's current nickel dominance. In this Power Plays interview, which was recorded at a Giga USA conference in Washington, D.C., we touched upon different issues, including the role of nickel in batteries in Prabowo's economic growth agenda, the following steps of Indonesia's nickel downstreaming policy, Indonesia's non-alignment foreign investment policy agenda, and various ESG challenges around the nickel industry. Thanks, Seto, for joining me today here at our Giga USA conference in Washington, all the way from Indonesia. So as a former Deputy Minister at the Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs under the previous President Jokowi, you were closely involved and perhaps even one of the architects of Indonesia's nickel downstreaming policy. So it's basically another word for Indonesia's strategy that enabled Indonesia to capture more value across the nickel and the battery value chain. Now, as a member of the National Economic Council, I believe you're more involved in the overall economic, so in the implementation of the overall economic strategy under the current President Prabowo. Perhaps, and that's, I think, worth outlining. So the main aim of this interview is to learn more about Indonesia's success story, if I can call it like that, the great achievements, the challenges, also looking at next steps, discussing the geopolitics around this, and also in terms of attracting international investments and the ESG challenges, obviously. But I'd like to start perhaps with asking you a bit more information and more background around your current role within the National Economic Council.
Yeah, thank you, Bryan. I think thank you very much for inviting me into this interview as well. Yeah. So my current role is as a member and executive secretary of the National Economic Council. Yeah. So it's a new institution set up by our president, Prabowo, in October. So the role of this council is to give recommendation, to the president, on his strategic economic priority programs. Yeah. So it's like what you said, I have a more broad responsibility, not only looking into this mining downstream policy, but other industry as well. One of the example is we are also now focusing on the labor-intensive industry, which has, I think, lower investment value, but have a higher impact on the employment, such as garment, footwear. Yeah. So that's my current role.
Okay, and to what extent do batteries and nickel play a role in this?
I think now we are trying to develop the midstream one. Yeah.
Okay.
I think on what you mentioned on the battery materials and the battery components. Yeah. So it's quite unique. We start on the very upstream. The second one is on the very downstream, which is the electric vehicle, the battery cell. Now we are moving into the midstream. Yeah. Why we are doing this one? Because we know that from the economic feasibility perspective, the upstream one is the one who has the highest, I would say, return. Then the second one is on the downstream, which is the battery cell, the battery pack, the EV. Yeah. The midstream one usually is have a less attractive, in terms of the IRR or the economic financial return. Yeah. So then, that's the strategy. We start from the very upstream, downstream, and then moving into the midstream.
Okay, super interesting. And perhaps to reflect back and looking back on your previous role, could you perhaps, because I think that our audience is not that familiar, or some might not be familiar with Indonesia's nickel downstreaming policy. So looking back at your previous role, could you perhaps provide more background on that downstreaming policy, the great achievements, the success story itself, but also perhaps the challenges that still need to be addressed, and lastly, the key takeaways for other emerging economies that are looking also to capture more value across the supply chain, countries like the DRC, but also others.
Thank you, Bryan. So I think our downstream policy started when I think our government at that time would like to get higher value added of our national resources. We used to export raw materials, basically, I always mention this is like, chicken and monkey economies, because of why? Because, how chicken getting the food, just dig, and eat. Monkey is just, taking the fruit and then you eat it directly. So I think that's the mindset that at the time our president would like to change, President Jokowi. So he asked us to design and work on this downstream policy, how we can improve the value added for our natural resources. So we start with the mining commodities, and nickel at that time is the first beginning. So I think the export ban first come in January 2014, if I'm not mistaken. We already included in our mining law in 2009. So we give them like 5 years, to actually preparing for this.
So it started actually way earlier than 2020, because a lot of people are focusing on that famous export ban, but it started way.
No, it's still way before,
Okay.
But at that time, we are not really successful attracting the investment.
Okay.
So only few smelter is coming in, invest in Indonesia. So we need to reopen the ban in 2017, end of 2017. Then I think, we fix the regulation, we fix the our instrument policy. Then we introduced the ban in 1st January of 2020. So that's actually the start. So how I think this journey begin and give the result until today is very interesting, because many people think that we only rely on the export ban. That's totally wrong.
Yeah.
So it's not only export ban. I always say this to my colleagues in African countries. You cannot only rely on the export ban to develop this downstream industry. You need to have good industrial policy and the good investment policy. So at that time, yes, we start with the export ban. But at the same time, we also encourage the development of the industrial estate, closer to the mining area. You know that nickel deposit in Indonesia is quite unique. It has lower grade compared to the Australian and the Canadian nickel. So you have a different technique of smelting and the processing for this nickel. But then also with this lower grade, nickel is not economical if you transport this nickel ore too far away.
Okay.
So it is better if you build closer to the mine.
You need to create integrated projects.
Yes. Then, we start with this industrial estate model. We give the permit to the investor to build power plant, port, industry inside this industrial estate. So they are the one who design how they want to build the industry, how they want to build the power plant and everything.
Okay.
We just give the permit, and this is the regulation that you have to follow. So that's first. The second one is the third one that is also important is the investment policy. So we give them incentive, but it's not like
tax incentive.
Tax incentive. But it's not like extraordinary. We give this incentive across industry. So not only nickel.
It's not nickel specific.
It's not nickel specific across industry, but at that time the timing is right. So this also give a push for our downstream policy. So these three instruments is very important. So you cannot just rely on the export ban. So I think that's the first lesson learned. The second one is actually that is also important is timing and the momentum. To be honest with you, this is, I think, God bless us. When we start this one, then we also see the start of the booming of the electric vehicle, lithium battery.
So the momentum was there.
Yeah, the momentum is there. So I think this is also very important point. So
because before it was only focused on stainless steel.
Started in 2021. We started to see this electric vehicle, lithium battery. We can extract a nickel coming out from limonite nickel ore that we have. We can extract the cobalt. So then, it's moving until today. The third part that is also important is, when we in 2022, our president also asked that, we want Indonesia developing this downstream industry, not only focus on a commodity by commodity, but you have to create an ecosystem.
Okay.
So, for example, if you want to make a EV, or if you want to make the lithium battery, you don't only need nickel, you don't only need cobalt, you don't only need manganese, but you need aluminum foil, you need copper foil, you need the anode, you need the lithium refinery and everything.
So that means you are betting not only on NMC, so nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistries,
Yeah.
but also on the LFP.
Yes,
chemistry. Okay.
this is actually the last part that I would like to
Sorry,
tell
I
you.
was too quickly.
Yeah, but I guess this is the instruction from the president. So we start to create this integrated ecosystem.
Yeah,
We find who is the best on the copper foil, who is the best on this lithium refinery. So we ask them to come invest in Indonesia and everything. And until today, I think I would say outside of China, Indonesia is country that has most complete ecosystem of the lithium battery.
Okay, interesting. And looking forward in terms of next steps, and also, I mean, you mentioned a couple of policy tools. There were some recent policy interventions that were quite interesting, I think, and worth mentioning, like the recent royalty hikes, the ore quota / production quota. But in terms of just looking at these policy tools, but also next steps, what is needed really to even to, as you said, to incentivize the midstream in Indonesia even more?
Yeah. I think on the first part you mentioned about the policy tools on the royalty and the production quota. I think it's very important. I met with one of the African countries 3 weeks ago in Singapore. So I think they mentioned about the issue on the country about the production that they cannot control fully. So I think this production quota is very important. It's a key tools for the government to make sure that we are not overflooding the market. I think it's very important because in Indonesia the structure is quite different. The mining company and the smelter is in many cases is not integrated. There is a lot of independent smelter who do not have their own mine.
It's true.
So it's a not an integrated, maybe like copper and everything.
And I think one challenge is also the ore quality is going down. So you basically need to manage that on the longer term.
Yes. So the production is very important, and then you have to make sure the balance between the player. Because then I think what a lesson learned that we learned back in 2017 is when you have very few smelter, but too many miners, then the smelter will control the nickel ore price. So we want to balance that. Okay. The price of the nickel ore is actually reflecting the market fairness. So that's the role of the production quota. Royalty, I guess. I think the way the government sees the economic impact that I think we can get from this commodity is still high, so that the government changed the policy using the progressive royalty rate. So the higher nickel ore, then the higher royalty that the government will get. So that's also one of the policy tools. On the midstream is actually quite different. The midstream one, I would say, is not really related with the nickel one. But it have a indirect impact. So when many of these battery materials company, they started coming to Indonesia, they are actually coming from the midstream. They know that the profitability in the midstream is not really good. So they're coming to Indonesia, they go one step upstream, which is going into the smelting, going to the refining. At that time, this is the profitability is very very attractive. So a lot of these battery material companies I mentioned, like CNGR, Huayo, they started with midstream. And then once they establish this smelting, this refining, the HPAL, then they do this integration on the precursor. So this is actually very reasonable because I give you an example. When we built this HPAL facility, usually before they need to do the crystallization of the MHP. Sometimes they need to process into the nickel sulfate. You adding cost just to transport this commodity. But now they built the precursor company next to the HPAL, which means that you just flow the HPAL that you just produce going directly into the precursor. So you eliminate this unnecessary cost.
Yeah.
So that's what I said. This is a very makes sense integration.
Okay.
And this is actually one of the lessons learned. If you want to go to the upstream, you cannot just rely on the ban. It's very difficult if you want to do ban on the process critical materials. So different stage you need to have different policy. That you need to make sure that, okay, this is going to work on this one, but this is not going to work on this step, so we need to change the policy.
And I think one recent policy too, I think we see this emerging around the world. I mean, the perfect example is the deployment of sovereign wealth fund by Gulf states, but we see this emerging as well in Indonesia and Antara, amongst others. So can you perhaps shed more light on how the country is deploying a sovereign wealth fund like Danantara in all of this?
Yes. I think we use our sovereign wealth fund. We have two, Danantara and INA.
Okay.
Both of them is investing on this space. Danantara is more on the upstream one. INA is more on the midstream one. Yeah. But I guess the logic is very makes sense. Yeah. When we start to develop this midstream business, we know our first target at that time is the anode. Because whether you are using LFP or NCM, the anode is the same. The anode is the same. You need to have a copper foil. You need to have this aluminum foil. But anode is very important. We know this anode producer in the world is very concentrated. So when we are successful to invite them to come to Indonesia, they're building a very big facility in Indonesia.
Which is based on Chinese technology? Or?
Based on the Chinese technology. But, you know, we asked them also to have a partner with the local.
Okay.
And then
that's basically your policy, right?
Yes. But this is not a mandatory. This has to be done on a B2B basis.
Okay.
Because I think it's very difficult for it's not a good signal if you are forcing them, you know, to do this one.
Like in other countries.
Yeah, but I guess, you know, for them to do the part of the risk management, once the investment is completed, you know, construction is completed, they are able to get the offtake and everything. It's very makes sense if you want to exit some of your investment, because you see that, okay, this is much manageable, and then you can sell at the higher price than your initial capital. So that's also part of the logic, on the midstream one. Now, I guess a lot of these battery materials on the midstream one, they are asking more of local companies to join the investment. We have this, for example, these anode factories the LFP cathode, which I think jointly invest by the Indonesian, by the South Korean, and the Chinese, on their plan in Indonesia, So this type of thing, I think, is going to be very typical happening in Indonesia.
And I think one of the aims of Indonesia now is also to diversify the international investments, also to some extent diversify away from too much or too many Chinese investment. And one interesting fact is that Indonesia is, in terms of geopolitical cooperation engagement, is using a non-alignment policy. You're basically doing business, cooperating with everyone. But could you perhaps give more information how this works in practice, and to what extent has Indonesia been successful in diversifying its investment policy and investments themselves away from Chinese ones?
I think one thing is that we have to admit that China have the most advanced technology for many of this critical mineral processing, and also for the battery materials, including the battery.
Is that something that is underestimated, you think, around the world?
I think not many people understand about this one, especially is the policymakers. Then I think it's going to be very difficult, if you want to exclude China, exclude certain countries, for this ecosystem. I think, yes, diversification is very important, but you cannot just do it in one night.
No.
So there is some step that you have to take place. For example, in Indonesia, we started 3-4 years ago, asking the domestic company to take more shares in the smelter on the processing. So I think you have to do it gradually because you need to prepare the capital, you need to prepare the human resources. Yeah. Regarding this non-alignment, I guess for Indonesia, number one is our national interest. So that's actually the key principles. Yeah. So we don't want to lean into one country's against the other.
Being too dependent.
Yeah, it's not good. Yeah. So when we start this downstream process, of course, it's very natural. The one that will come first is actually the Chinese company. They have the technology, they understand the risk, they have the capital. But now if you see in Indonesia, you will see Taiwanese company, Indian company, European company, even US company, Ford is also coming. Which means that we are open to anybody. We are giving the same opportunity. As long as you follow the regulation in Indonesia, that's it.
You're welcome to invest.
You're welcome to invest. So I think that's very principle. The second one is we also understand for this nickel-based battery, I guess the key market will be US and Europe.
Yep.
And we know that LFP has been very big in China. So then I think we need to diversify. The market is something that is necessary. Yeah. We need to open our access in Europe. We need to open our access in US. Even though that, Bryan, don't get me wrong, there is no premium when we are selling to US or to Europe. For Indonesia, we are selling to anybody. This is a commodity price.
Yeah.
You have the benchmark price that is available for people to see.
Yeah.
So there is no such thing as a premium. That's why I think we are not looking into it because we want to get premium. We want to US government to give us the incentive. No, this is part as well as our national interest. Diversification is
big
good.
Markets. Yeah.
Diversification is good. Yeah. Even though that now we also develop this LFP technology. Yeah. We already have the LFP cathode facility in Indonesia. I think this is one of the kind outside of China. And I think we are very proud of it because it's invested not only by the Chinese company, but Indonesian company, South Korean company is investing in this facility as well.
And how is the engagement going, I mean, geopolitically between governments, between Indonesia and the US and between Indonesia and the European Union?
Yeah, we fully understand that as a biggest nickel producer in the world, I think now we control about 65% of the total production of the nickel. We have the responsibility to supply enough nickel to the market. So we don't want to use this critical mineral as a weapon.
Unlike other players.
So this is not a good thing because you have to understand that the end buyer, which is for our nickel, for the battery will be the US and the European market. Have to see that Indonesia is a reliable producer. We are not going to make any policy that can have a disruption in the market. So that's very important. So that's why I think engaging with EU and the US is very key. And then the second one is we also need to be reasonable, which means that Indonesia, even though that we have the biggest nickel in the world, we cannot ask everything has to be built in Indonesia. We cannot ask that the battery cell has to be built in Indonesia, everything has to be built in Indonesia. It doesn't make sense. So then we need to have this discussion with EU. We already started since last year. With US, I think since 2 years ago, how we can develop this resilient supply chain. What kind of steps that can be done in Indonesia?
Basically integrating the supply chains. Okay.
What kind of step that can be done in Indonesia, and what kind of step that you can do in your country, in the European Union, in the US.
To be complementary then.
Yes. So then we have the supply chain. Then we can share the value added. Then we can trust each other that this is something that we really want to work on, so we can secure the supply, we can supply enough the market. I think this is very important. The last one is that, you have to maintain the price equilibrium, Bryan. And I always say this one because for mining countries, they want to see the commodity price as high as possible. And it's very natural. It's very natural. When I talk to my colleagues in Australia, for example, of course they want to have as high as possible of nickel price, but you need to understand that nickel is not the only critical minerals that is needed for the lithium battery. For example, in this case, but you have the alternative technology. You have the LFP, you now have the sodium ion and everything. So you need to maintain this price equilibrium so that the downstream player, the battery makers, the EV, can still make a profit
Yeah, not pivoting away to other technologies solely. Yeah.
But at the same time, the producer, the miner, the smelter also enjoy good return.
Yeah.
For their operation. Yeah. So I think this is very important. The price equilibrium of the commodity. Yeah. So this is something that we are also taking carefully. Yeah. When we have this nickel price increase back in 2022 to 50,000, 100,000. Yeah. And I talked to many of the stainless steel makers. They said, oh, basically, nickel price above 24,000. There is no stainless steel producer will make a profit.
Yeah.
Right. So if they don't make a profit, then how come they can sell? How come they get production?
Yeah, that's an important thing, I think, to keep in mind.
Yes.
Now, perhaps the last issue that I wanted to cover is, the ESG picture in the nickel industry in Indonesia. I mean, that has been mentioned a lot of times. Obviously, some people call it, to be very blunt, dirty nickel. But I mean, also according to us, the picture is far more nuanced than that. I mean, you've got carbon emissions, but it's far more than carbon. It's social issues, but also other issues. How is because to my understanding, Indonesia is trying to tackle these issues. So how is the government doing that with the local stakeholders?
So I think I will address your question one by one. Yeah, I think on the carbon emission, to be honest with you, for the nickel, for the stainless steel, is going to be very difficult for us to reduce the emission. Yeah. So if you expect green NPI coming out from Indonesia, it's almost impossible. Yeah. Maybe we can produce few using the hydropower. Yeah. Why is that? Because in many nickel deposit, in many of this industrial estate, there is no available baseload renewable energy. So we don't have that many hydro, we don't have the geothermal. Yeah. So we need to rely on coal. So for this CO2 emission for the nickel NPR for the stainless steel, if you request a green steel coming out from Indonesia, just forget about it. This is
that's clear.
This is the situation.
I
mean, if you don't like it, then
It also comes down to market competitiveness, right?
Yes. But for the nickel, for the battery, because we are using the HPAL, I think we are very competitive on the CO2 emission. Now more and more, we can reduce the electricity generation coming out from coal-fired power plant using the sulfuric acid processing facility, so they can recycle the steam to generate electricity. So if you see now the nickel coming out from the HPAL in Indonesia is going to be very comparable with the Australian and the Canadian nickel in terms of the CO2 emission. But in terms of the one that is very sensitive is of course the tailing for the HPAL. In Indonesia, we do not allow any deep sea tailing. Most of it is using dry stacking or either tailing dam. But now with the current profitability that they enjoy, I would say majority is going to use this dry stacking. We are going to develop some technology to extract more iron, to extract more sulfur coming out of this tailing, so that we can reduce significantly the volume of the tailing. I think you will see in the next 2-3 years we are going to have this technology. On the labor, I think one thing that we want to make sure is that there is a labor union over there, so that can help the government to monitor the situation. The issue on the labor and all this incident is very concentrated into one of these industrial estate. Why is that? Because this is our first industrial estate, and then we do not expect that this is going to be this big 100,000 people working over there. We already asked actually the company not to add more investment over there, because the support system from that area is not enough. But this has been the lesson learned for the other industrial estate to develop. One thing that is government is pushing for this ESG is actually ask all the smelter and the nickel company to follow third-party ESG certification. And we ask actually the buyer. I talk a lot with Tesla, with Ford, with many of these EV automaker, to ask this certification. Because yes, the government is pushing through our regulation to enforce for this ESG, but at the end, the buyer will have bigger say, because you can say that, okay, if you don't meet my standard, I don't want to buy your nickel.
Yeah.
So now I guess there are 2 company going to IRMA certification.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 company. RMI is plenty now in Indonesia. Many
changing.
nickel smelter is having this RMI certification. Yeah. Nickel mark is also start to have the socialization in Indonesia. So the push from the buyer is very key. Bryan, and it's very essential. Yeah. So that's, I think, with the government through the regulation, but the buyer pushing for this independent
downstream buyer
ESG.
too.
I think it's going to be change the landscape.
Okay. That brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you.